Modern skyscrapers take years to build. Even with diesel cranes, precision-cut steel, and global supply chains, moving thousands of tons of material is slow, calculated, and brutally complex. Now remove all of it. No machines, no engines, no infrastructure. Rewind to 445 BC. A fractured group of refugees stands in a hostile landscape, starving, exposed, surrounded by armed warlords who want them erased. Their objective: rebuild 2.5 miles of fortified limestone wall, complete with massive gates reinforced in iron. They didn't take a decade. They didn't take a year. They did it in 52 days. That number shouldn't make sense. Run it through modern engineering models, the labor, the material weight, the supply chain, and the conclusion is the same every time. It's not just difficult, it's impossible. And this wasn't a clean construction site. They were building on top of a 150-year-old ruin, burned, shattered, unstable, while under constant threat of attack. Miss the deadline, and there would be no delay, only destruction. This is not just a story about a wall. It's a case study in extreme conditions, where physics, logistics, and human endurance collide. A forensic investigation into one of the most improbable defense projects in ancient history, Nehemiah's Iron Wall. Jerusalem wasn't empty. It was a graveyard. A century earlier, the Babylonian army under Nebuchadnezzar had reduced it to ash. The cedar gates burned so intensely that even the limestone fractured and degraded into brittly, useless stone. Time made it worse. Sand buried the wreckage. Floods hardened ash into sludge. Wild animals nested in the ruins. By 445 BC, this wasn't a foundation. It was an obstacle. The workers said it plainly. The strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Before they could build anything, they had to clear everything. No machines, no carts, just baskets, bare hands, and thousands of tons of jagged debris under brutal heat. And these weren't builders. They were goldsmiths, priests, merchants, exhausted, bleeding, overwhelmed. And leading them? Not a general, not an architect, a cupbearer. But in the court of Artaxerxes I, that role meant something very different. The cupbearer was a security chief, trusted to detect threats, control access, and guard the king from assassination. Nehemiah wasn't a servant. He was an intelligence operator. From his position in Susa, he secured military escort, royal timber, and authority to rebuild a fortified city. But when he arrived in Jerusalem, he realized something critical. The rubble wasn't the greatest threat.
The real battle was never the wall. It was psychological. Enter Sanballat and Tobiah. Not raiders, not opportunists, power brokers. Men who had built their influence on a single fact: Jerusalem was broken. A defenseless city meant leverage. It meant control over trade routes. It meant easy taxation, easy intimidation, easy raids. As long as the wall stayed down, Jerusalem stayed weak, and they stayed in power. Then Nehemiah arrived, and everything changed. A fortified Jerusalem wasn't just a construction project. It was a direct threat to the regional balance of power. So they moved to shut it down, not with swords, yet, with strategy. Phase 1. Mockery. Sanballat didn't whisper his attack. He performed it. Standing before his allies, his soldiers, his influence network, he laughed. What are these feeble Jews doing? The word feeble wasn't casual. It was surgical. Weak, starving, incapable. Then he escalated. Will they restore their wall? Will they bring stones back to life from those burned heaps? And then Tobiah delivered the finishing strike. Even a fox climbing on it would break it down. This wasn't random insult. This was psychological warfare. Attack the people, attack the materials, attack the outcome. If you can make a man believe failure is inevitable, you don't have to stop him. He'll stop himself. And for a moment, it worked. Because everything they said sounded true. The workers were exhausted. The stones were damaged. The timeline was impossible. Doubt began to creep in, quietly, subtly, like a crack in the foundation. But Nehemiah didn't respond. No counterargument, no public defense, no wasted energy. He gave one command: keep building. Because he understood something critical. Debating your enemy gives them a platform. Ignoring them denies them oxygen. So the stones kept rising, and the insults lost power. Phase 2. Terror. Mockery failed, so the strategy shifted. This time they didn't laugh. They mobilized. A coalition formed, Sumerians to the north, Ammonites to the east, Arabs to the south, forces from Ashdod to the west. Jerusalem was surrounded, not attacked. Surrounded. It was a pressure tactic, a tightening noose. Then came the rumors. Whispers slipped into the city. They're coming at night. They'll slip through the gaps. They'll kill you before you wake up. No official declaration. No visible movement. Just fear. And fear spreads faster than any army. Sleep disappeared. Every shadow became a threat. Every sound in the dark felt like a footstep. Every night felt like the last. The workers weren't just building anymore. They were waiting. Waiting to be attacked. Waiting to be overrun. Waiting to die. And that waiting began to break them. People from surrounding villages came with warnings. Again and again. Stop. Come down. Leave before it's too late. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. The message was relentless. You cannot win this. Fatigue and fear began to merge. Bodies were already failing. Now minds were following. And this is where most missions collapse. Not from external force, but internal fracture. Because once morale breaks, the structure follows. Stone by stone. Man by man. Until everything gives way. The turning point. Nehemiah watched it happen. He saw the exhaustion. He heard the fear. He understood the pattern. This wasn't about walls anymore. This was about survival under pressure. About whether a group of untrained, exhausted civilians could hold their ground when every signal around them screamed retreat. And in that moment, the truth became clear. This wasn't a construction project. It was a war. A war of endurance. A war of morale. A war of psychological dominance. And if he tried to fight it with conventional methods, they wouldn't just lose the wall. They would lose everything. So Nehemiah did the only thing left. He changed the rules of the game.
To beat an impossible deadline under constant threat, Nehemiah deployed a system that was far ahead of its time: decentralized logistics. At first glance, the historical record reads like a dry list of names: who built which gate, who repaired which section. But hidden in that list is the strategy that made everything possible. Nehemiah broke the workforce apart. Instead of one massive construction crew, he spread thousands of workers across the entire 2.5-mile perimeter, building everything at once. But the real breakthrough wasn't just logistical, it was psychological. He assigned families to rebuild the exact section of wall directly in front of their own homes. That changed everything. If you're working on a distant section, you might rush, you might cut corners. But if your children will sleep behind the wall you're building, every stone matters. Every joint is packed tight. Every block is chosen for strength. Quality control became automatic. Motivation surged. The wall didn't just rise, it accelerated. But as progress increased, so did the danger. Sanballat's forces were closing in. The workers were exhausted, and now they were expected to fight. Nehemiah responded with a new doctrine.
He split the workforce into two. Half worked, half stood guard. From sunrise to nightfall, builders hauled stone while armed men stood behind them, shields raised, spears ready, forming a continuous defensive perimeter. But even the builders were armed. Those carrying materials worked with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Every movement became harder, every task slower. The physical strain multiplied. They didn't change clothes. They slept beside their weapons. Every night carried the expectation of attack. And there was one final problem: distance. The workforce was stretched thin across miles of wall. If one section was attacked, the others wouldn't know in time. So Nehemiah built a communication system. A man with a trumpet, a shofar, stood beside him at all times. The order was simple. When the trumpet sounded, everyone would converge on that point. Wherever you hear the sound, join us there. It was an ancient rapid response network. An attack anywhere would trigger a full-force defense within minutes. What looked like a scattered workforce became a single unified strike force. The effect was immediate. The enemy lost their advantage. No surprise attacks, no weak points, no isolated targets. The psychological pressure flipped. The same leaders who mocked the builders now watched an armed, disciplined population raise a fortified wall at impossible speed. Day 30, day 40, day 50. The workers were at their limit, muscles failing, heat relentless, but they didn't stop. They set the gates, installed the beams, locked the city. On day 52, the work ended. 2.5 miles of fortified wall stood complete around Jerusalem. And there was no final battle, no last stand. Instead, something more decisive happened: collapse. The record states that when the surrounding nations saw the finished wall, they lost their confidence. They understood the math. This shouldn't have been possible. Not with starving workers, not with primitive tools, not under constant threat. What they faced wasn't just a rebuilt wall. It was a system they couldn't break. Nehemiah didn't just construct a physical barrier, he built a psychological one. He turned fear into discipline and desperation into defense. The mission was over. The city was sealed, and the threat that once surrounded it stopped.